So I've long thought that good art, good cinema, a good short story is kind of like good coffee in a way. A good story will build towards a crescendo in its very final line, and the line will hit you with an incredible impact. And same with the film. The film is a meandering up and down roller coaster exploration of something that ideally lifts you to its climax. And then when the final image or the scene hits you, it's like having an espresso shot. And I kind of measure the power of an aesthetic experience through the amount of espresso that gets put into my brain. Powerful film is like having one beautiful Italian espresso. A very powerful film is like having a double shot. And if I have kind of one of my favorite films of all time, which we'll talk about in a moment, is kind of like having 5 or 6 shots of espresso. Vroom, they go like this to the brain, arresting the brain, lighting up all of my neurology, and I'm stood in shock for hours, not quite knowing what to do with myself through a mixture of illumination and anxiety. And so that for me is the aesthetic experience. I'm sat in a state of rapture and bewilderment, trying to put together the pieces of the thing that just impacted me so much. This is why we love art. This is why I love cinema, in hunt of the aesthetic experience and for moments like this. So for some reason, I've personally always resonated more with tragedies than anything else. I think the emotional gut punch that a good tragedy brings is like this quintuple espresso shot to the brain. And the other thing about tragedies, which I find so beautiful, is that the tragedy hits strongest when I identify most with the protagonist, really in his shoes. I'm rooting for him. Usually he's a complicated and mixed up guy. Yep, me too. That helps the identification all the more. And then at the end of the film, when things don't work out in the altogether integrated and uplifting kind of comedic happy ending way, I feel like a part of my soul has lived that tragedy. And then the beauty, I think the service of a tragedy, having seen my protagonist, having seen me on the big screen failing in this way, I then take the pain, the emotional jolt of that story into my own life, and I don't commit the same sins, or I fix whatever flaws in me that led this great protagonist to his demise. Such is the power. So I'm going to talk about 3 main movies, I think possibly my favorite 3 out of every film, and then I'll finish with a couple more as well. And first of all, I want to speak about Fellini's La Dolce Vita. So this came out in 1960, so we're talking about the late 50s, early 1960s culture of Rome, and particularly it was the age of the paparazzi. And the paparazzi, well, what was happening in Rome at the time was that there was a great cinema boom. A lot of the biggest celebrities and stars from Hollywood and the rest of the world would be in Rome. And so this is where the paparazzi were born. These photographers, press reporters who wanted to get the inner scoop on the lives of the rich and famous. So La Dolce Vita follows Marcello around, and he is a paparazzo, and so he wants to get close to beauty and fame and just have this incredible life. In fact, it's kind of not clear what Marcello wants. He's just in this incredible melee and this carnival of the sweet life in Rome, and he's just riding around having a really good time. As good a time as he can. And so one of the most iconic films of the cinema is that he's in the Trevi Fountain, almost kissing Anita Ekberg, who is like the world star of the time, and he nearly but not quite has that shot of transcendence. And then you kind of watch through the episodes of different scuffles and affairs and women that he's with, that the life of Marcello kind of dwindles down into greater chaos and obscurity, and at the end into this beautiful party scene where he makes an ass of a drunk of himself and ends up on the beach. And so one of the great things about this film for me are the symbols. You have this opening symbol of Jesus Christ flying, carried by a helicopter through the air, and Marcello's waving to the girls on their balconies who are standing there in bikinis. And then at the end, they rescue this kind of dead, I think, jellyfish-looking thing from the sea. So you, you kind of see from high and hopeful to very, very low what the symbolic quality of this character's life has looked like. And very interestingly in La Dolce Vita, you've got this kind of lost boy, flying Peter Pan, handsome, playful, at times charming, but chancing his way, trying to claw together a bit of a life character who's very likable, even though he doesn't really have much in the way of virtue. You follow him and you watch him through his episodic life, but the men in his story in particular are symbols of possibility, symbols of hope. You have his father who comes in, and what the father wants to do is kind of ride actually on his son's coattails a little bit and go out and have a good time. And when the father's drunk enough, eaten enough, and caroused enough with the local women, he then swiftly gets back on the train and goes home, abandoning Marcello again. So you're watching this sweet life unfold, but you realize there's zero sense of father figure, paternal structure, modeling of what a life that transcends this continual hedonism. There's an absence of that from the father. So Marcello, why is he living the sweet life? Well, he is in this perpetual meaningless swamp because there's no sense, not even of a first mountain. There's no sense of following your father's footsteps and do something good, let alone a second mountain. And so you have the other male figure in Marcello's life in La Dolce Vita, who is Steiner. And Steiner appears as the pinnacle of culture. He lives the art life. He's surrounded by gifted people. He has this wonderful apartment where they host salons and is full of books. And Steiner looks like he could be something either of the first mountain, just copy this kind of success, write your book, Marcello, and achieve some of these normal social dreams. He could even be a model of the second mountain, which is, I found meaning in philosophy and letters and living a really, really good life. And so Marcello takes Steiner on as somewhat as an out, as a possible father figure, and a view of what redemption could be. And then you see ultimately what the fate is between Steiner and Marcello, and where we're left as the audience lingering, which is this perpetual, actually, even though there's all the parties, all the women, the good life of Rome, a life that you might want to fly back in time and live, I certainly have done, but there is nothing there in terms of a legacy that could be built on, a legacy that could transcend him. Marcello is left scratching around, wondering what meaning is ever going to be in his life. So that's a beautiful depiction of the swampland. I use words like desert and wasteland, but actually the desert and the wasteland can be very, very alluring. Could look like traveling overseas, can look like women, drugs, parties, and the whole thing. Can even look like an ongoing spiritual exploration, all the different cults and workshops of the world. But fundamentally, he's going round and round in circles without any vision of possible building an ascent or ascension in front of him. So a similar film, which I identified so strongly with, is Wong Kar-wai's 2046. So this is the follow-up film to a very famous movie called In the Mood for Love. And if you really want to get the most impact out of these films, I recommend you watch first In the Mood for Love, and then you watch second 2046. So to run through it, In the Mood for Love, let's say there's a potential of a great love affair, first mountain kind of love. Are you going to go in there and make the love happen, or are you not? That's kind of the question of the film. And then as we come to 2046, we look at what happens to Mo Wan Chao's life a few years after In the Mood for Love. And so you find a man who, again, is approaching middle age, and again, who's living some kind of Dolce Vita. This is 1960s Hong Kong. And because of his failures in conventional love, he decided to turn himself into somewhat of a ladies' man. And so he lives in this hotel in the room number 2046, and in and out of the hotel come different women in different phases. And so you see actually this incredible yearning for love, because he is befriending, flirting with, having affairs with, experiencing this kind of polarity with every single woman that comes near him in his life. Some of them he sleeps with, some of them he doesn't, some of them he has a kind of limerence for. But in every single occasion, there is a failure on his part to truly open his heart and allow love in. Basically, because of the wounds he picked up in the past have been so much, he keeps his heart closed. So the women come in and out of his life, and you see them come closer. Is he going to open his heart? Isn't he going to open his heart? It builds to a beautiful crescendo. And this is one of the most poetic films that I've ever seen in my life. And it has some incredible commentary about pain in the past, being stuck in the past, going mentally into the future so I can forget about my past, wanting to love but having delayed reactions, because as the kind of android, there's a weird sci-fi aspect to this film, as the android gets older and the battery life goes down, while the response of actually knowing what I feel gets lower and lower. So even if I feel some loving feelings, I don't discover for 10 hours, 100 hours, 1,000 hours that actually there was a sense of love and possibility there. By the time I realized that I wanted love, the opportunity for love is gone. So this, for me, is one of the most epic explorations of the swampland in particular, and in this case characterized by this broken-hearted but nihilistic attempt to try and get love without having at hand the innocence and the purity to do what is needed to call it in. And one of the great ironies, I believe, about love is that it's always so close. It's literally, are you going to see it and feel it exactly how it is? And have you got what it takes to open and allow love to come in and affect you? It's literally closer than the tip of our nose. And yet, certainly I spent a few years of my life in the room 2046, doing everything with these incredible women all around me to have love, and then not being able to see this one piece that keeps me in a sense of wilderness, in a sense of isolation and lovelessness. So my other favorite film of all time, which speaks very much to a man's swampland, but actually I believe gives us a strange redeeming possibility. It's very, very vague, but now we start to get a shred of possibility. It's Apocalypse Now. And this is based on the novel Heart of Darkness, which for me is one of the greatest books ever written. And Apocalypse Now is the Francis Ford Coppola movification film version of that great book. And he plants it in the middle of the Vietnam War. So not only are we having the Willard's quest, Marlowe's quest, to find out what the Heart of Darkness is and go and track down Colonel Kurtz, this rogue army colonel in the middle of the jungle. So in Conrad's book, he was in the heart of darkest Africa, and in Apocalypse Now, he's actually in Cambodia. And so Willard, the protagonist, is given the mission that he has to hunt down. He has to go geographically to the heart of darkness to find a character who's gone insane and has gone rogue, and who embodies himself, the heart of human darkness and what human darkness can be. And so I love this. This is so much talking about my own life. I'm drawn, as Willard is, into this quest, into the center of the earth, and to find what is the source of darkness, what is the ultimate embodiment of darkness as a man. And so we start off in this film in a swamp. Willard already has PTSD, is already struggling through missions in this brutal and chaotic war. And so he's going on his unyielding, slow journey up the river, but he himself is zigzagged by this extreme weirdness. The way they depict Vietnam in this film is just incredible. And Willard hones in so he can actually look at some point this Colonel Kurtz in the face and meet eye to eye with the heart of darkness. And so with a lot of good films where there is a protagonist on the trail of some dark foe, what happens actually in the climax, where there's a meeting point between the light and the dark, is that the light sees in the dark that the dark already exists in the light. And so in that final meeting, Willard understands this is what absolute human darkness is: insanity, the insanity. And I now have the full human darkness myself in my own spirit. I've looked at the darkest demons in the world. I've breathed in the face of them. I've allowed myself to be taken by the brutality of the jungle, and I have that knowing deep within me. So what started off as a swampland or a wasteland for Willard, our protagonist, ends up with him going so far into the depths of the swamp and the madness that he meets the point of ultimate insanity and brutality and bestiality. It's the worst of the worst of the worst, where anyone would fear to go. And interestingly, it's by going into the eye of the storm that, of course, something calming comes over his soul. At the end of Apocalypse Now, you have this wonderful hush of my mission into the heart of darkness has actually been a success in some oblique way, beyond actual success or failure, but I carry now the heart of darkness within me. And so the movie ends, and we don't actually know what happens to Willard as he comes back to, Saigon, or goes back to America afterwards. But there is the possibility that now that his business in the swamp has finished, he has a redeeming shot at a different life. And so if you remember back to our characters particularly in the first Mountain video, they ultimately had a demise because they were absolutely unwilling to feel the heart of their pain and the center of their blackness and their insanity. But here, in the very end of Apocalypse Now, you have somebody who has faced that, and there we get our cinematic sense of redemption. Now that you've seen into the heart of the swamp and the wasteland, what becomes possible? That's the analogy for us. You've gone bravely into the swamp with your eyes fully open, meeting the demons. You've done that. What is now possible? Now we can really have a different conversation. So I'll leave you with a quick couple of bonus ones at the end of this video. There are a lot of films that you could classify as having the journey to the center of the earth trope, which always means journey to the center of yourself, right? Another really good one is The Sheltering Sky. You have a man and a woman on a trip in North Africa. They start in Morocco and they end up way out in the desert. And so the south, or kind of below the border, south of the border, in art and in cinema, typically represents I'm going out of my waking mind and into the realm of the body, into the realm of desire, intuition, dream, felt senses. And a lot of these films end up with a sense of rapture or madness or kidnap or utter horror. And then within that, you actually discover what is at the center of you, what is at the center of yourself. Sheltering Sky is beautiful. You've also got this in the Che Guevara film, The Motorcycle Diaries. He goes off into the deepest, darkest Amazon to a colony of lepers and finds out what he's really made of, the virtues at the bottom of that fear that he felt. And you have this also beautifully in Into the Wild, which is another swamp story, I would say, without redemption. You've got on the one hand a young man in exile wanting to run away from First Mountain America and the whole corporate plastic facade that his parents lived under. But you also have with him a genuine questioning, this love of Walt Whitman and Thoreau and these great writers and poets who wanted to understand the American wilderness and what it meant to actually be free. So within his swampland, there are the open-hearted questions of, is freedom of the human spirit possible? And what if I throw myself into radical uncertainty and surrender to the wilderness? What if I trust every invitation that comes my way? And what if there is a pinnacle of beauty on the road? So Into the Wild tackles all these questions in a really beautiful way, I believe. And then you have more recently a great Italian movie called The Eight Mountains, where you see two kind of brothers, lifelong friends, kind of stepbrothers in a way. You've got the one who kind of has an education and travels, and you have the one who's devoted to his land. And you watch two very contemporary men hit middle age in their own lives and try and assess, has my wandering, has my kind of exile and my choices of how I live, my isolation and my desolation, does that steer me more towards a sense of grail or not? And you see this flipping between the kind of succeeding and the failing of these two different brothers as they both engage in this swampland. And then finally, touching on relationships, one of the most beautiful relationship films, which one of the most difficult to watch for sure, is Ingmar Bergman's Scenes of a Marriage. And here you have the same kind of first mountain, wasteland, second mountain journey depicted only in the realm of a man's relationship with his spouse. So a young Swedish couple get married, classic first mountain relationship. We just need to get married, do all the right things, host the dinner parties in the right way, you know, be the couple that we see in magazines. And you see the relationship start to break down, and you see the relational wilderness between this couple, and how the communication gets hard, how the pains of not being seen and missing each other, and the detritus of all these unresolved conflicts builds up and plunges them both into a relationship wilderness. And the question that the end of the film is tackling is, will they or will they not be able, within the scope of their marriage, to redeem the swamp of their bitterness, and therefore try and scale a second mountain together, a second marriage with the same person? Will they be able to do that and move towards kind of aging and wisdom together? Or will the marriage rupture and they will have to find their second marriage, their second mountain in love somewhere else? So much beautiful stuff. And the purpose why, just to reiterate from the first video, the purpose why a lot of these films seem kind of oblique and unredeemed and leave you with greater question marks than you even go in with at the beginning, is because by exploring this visceral emotional terrain of the swampland with the movie's not going to wrap that up in a pleasant bow so you can have easy mental answers and walk out the cinema unchallenged. Obviously, they're unpacking some brutal images and storylines so that you end up with the questions and the emotions and the awareness, and you end up working on how you might escape the swampland in a meaningful way, rather than kind of falling down the quicksand and becoming buried in it, how you might do that for yourself. So if you're really interested in this conversation, if you're loving these videos, I offer support to explore the swampland and what the first and second mountains mean to you. If you want to know more, just click below at the legacy page and you can find out more there.